I won't for a second back down from the moral high ground that we need to pull our kids out of these schools, put them in something different. We need to be warriors to defund this catastrophe and arm families to the best extent possible with other options.
Hello and welcome back to the Hannah Frankman podcast. On today's episode, I'm speaking with John Papola. John is the founder of a nonprofit called Emergent Order and the host of the Dad Saves America podcast. In today's episode, we talk about the idea of Dad Saves America, where the name comes from, why the name is so important, and why John believes that the family unit is the most important place to build the future of American culture, not institutions, not companies, and not the government. We talk about his experience building media brands, including the high production show that is Dad Saves America, but also his economics rap videos that went viral that launched his career as an independent media creator. We talk about some of the guests that he's had on the show and how he thinks about the conversations that he most wants to facilitate and his predictions for what the biggest challenges are and will be that we'll need to solve as a culture, both on a family level, but also institutionally. This episode was recorded as part one of a doubleheader. So I went into John's studio in Southwest Austin to record this episode, which you will see in a moment. We spent a couple hours recording this. We took a break for lunch, and then we literally turned the tables, and John interviewed me for Dad Saves America. So if you would like, you can listen to this episode as part one of the doubleheader. You can hear John tell the story of how Dad Saves America came to be, and then you can listen to his interview with me where I talk about this show and the work that I do and how to think about choosing alternatives to public school for your family. John and I also discovered in preparation for this interview that we are practically neighbors, which really reinforces what I've said on this podcast a few times, which is that Austin is truly a hub of innovative education and commentary and the future of how we think about school. I had a lot of fun recording this episode, and I hope you enjoy listening. John, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here with you. Good to be here.
In your studio. Speaking of your studio, I want to talk about Dad Saves America. How did this come to be?
So, how long do we have?
90 to 120 minutes,
Excellent.
Depending on how long we want to go.
Okay, very good. So,
I do have other questions, though.
I'll try to keep it not boring as best I can. So I'm a filmmaker first and foremost. I came out of TV. I worked at Nickelodeon and Spike and MTV back in New York. I moved to Austin in 2011 to start a company called Emergent Order because I made weird rap videos pitting John Maynard Keynes and Friedrich Hayek against each other. And they took off and they get used in schools like crazy. And I was like, this is my calling, is to be a weird filmmaking nerd about like liberty and philosophy and apply production value to that doesn't make any sense. So that's my calling. And along the way, I started making feature-length documentaries. I did one with Arthur Brooks called The Pursuit, which I'm very proud of. It came out great when it was on Netflix, which was pretty neat. And then I was working on a new project that was inspired partly by my own observations as a dad, and partly by reading The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. And that was that. So my son just turned 19, but if go back 5-6 years, he's in middle school and he's doing fine, but his peers are like a wreck. Like several of them have like deep anxiety and they seem like afraid of their own shadow. He had a girlfriend, which was great, but she would like hide behind him when they'd show up together at the house, or when he would, come in from them taking a walk outside, and was like, what's going on? Like, what is this anxious fear thing that's happening? And then that layered on top, when my son got into middle school, he started getting bombarded with like basically gender and identity politics stuff that seemed so wildly inappropriate for his age that it was really hard to understand. and this isn't before all this woke stuff became prevalent, but it was like, it was 5 years ago. So it's only gotten more and more crazy as each year has passed. So I started working on a documentary the working title was The Kids Are Not All Right. And it was like, what is happening to a generation that appears to be incapable of embracing their what psychologists call their internal locus of control, their agency. They're risk averse, they're nervous. How are we going to have a free society if we have the next generation scared to take action and like looking for the parental figure in every situation? And we start working on this film. I film with Jonathan Haidt, and I do a whole sequence with Lenore Skenazy about how she let her 9-year-old take the subway and got called the world's worst mom. And then COVID hits and the production gets shut down. And frankly, it almost puts us out of business. And in that summer, I'm thinking like, well, what am I going to do next? Like, what's happening? Like, should I keep doing what I'm doing and just survive? Should we reimagine what we're doing? And I ultimately decide, I think I want to reimagine our business as a original content studio more than like an agency, because we kind of worked with clients before. That meant for us becoming a nonprofit because we're very education focused. And then this project, which to me was like the center of my concern now, is like, I'm a very libertarian minded person, and I'm worried about how a free society survives these cultural winds. And so this is actually the most important thing to me at this point, and still to this day. And it became clear that one film isn't enough. And I was getting feedback along those lines. And so we were like, let's reimagine this from being a film to being something that can be an ongoing project, that we can build an audience around trying to think about parenting. And initially just about parenting, how to raise our kids to thrive in a free society and want to keep it, basically. And then my wife, Lisa, who is smarter than me on most things, said, this isn't really about parenting for you. This is about being a dad. Like, that's your thing that you love more than anything else. You were at Spike TV. It was like the first network for men. It's like you care about, and like the team that we were sort of rebuilding from the ground up were a lot of guys with kids and dads. And it was like, we should focus on dads. We should focus on what's happening with our boys in particular, but not exclusively, but especially on being a dad. We brought in Warren Farrell, who wrote The Boy Crisis, and the heart of that book is basically that fatherlessness is the root cause of kind of everything, actually, that's going wrong in our society if you really scratch the surface of this. And so it felt like, wow, there's a real need here. And so Dad Saves America was born out of that.
I love the name because it hits on something that I think people underestimate the power of, which is the importance. You're focusing particularly on dads, but the importance of the family unit as the thing to be addressed in any of the problems we see with education, the raising of our children. You can focus all day on how do we make the education system better to sort of be a safety net for all of the things that are going wrong in the home. You can argue all day about social media usage and internet accessibility and how much kids should have access to. But really, at the end of the day, it's a night and day difference between a home where the parents are super involved and are asking the right kinds of questions around how to raise their kids and the ones that aren't. And so I love the entire framing. And I want to hear you talk more about the philosophy of, because I know it goes deep, of how you think about this, like the importance of the family unit as being the thing that saves a culture.
It's a good question because, I came into this having geeked out on economics for like a long time. And what's weird is I didn't study economics formally at all. So, and yet, like, economists use my videos in their classes. So that's completely weird because I have the only econ class I took was in high school. It was taught by Mr. Ramella, who was the football coach. It wasn't very good. Right? God bless Mr. Ramella, great guy.
Wait, really quickly. If it wasn't a good class, where did this passion for economics come from? If it didn't come from school?
Well, I think this I don't know if this is a philosophy so much as an experience. And I've made videos about this and it kind of underpins everything. I was always a super ambitious guy. I kind of knew I wanted to be in film and video since like middle school. I was making videos for like, as soon as my dad got a video camera, I was captivated by like making videos. And I kind of had a direction that I was blessed to sort of stick with from a pretty early age, which not everybody has, and that's okay. And when my son was born in 2005, it was so transformational for me from my understanding of who I am that that is the moment where there is a new person born. You know, I'd interviewed Brett Weinstein and Heather Hang, and Brett put it really well. He said, you know, kids destroy your life and replace it with a better one. And that's absolutely true. And for me, and it took years to realize this, my son's birth actually freed me from the thing that I think holds us all back one way or another. And it's like the prison of our own ego. It's like, oh, my hopes and dreams and ambitions aren't actually as important as I thought they were. Like, I can afford to not achieve any of those things and I'll be okay, in comparison to this other part of my life that's now so much more fulfilling, so much more magical and miraculous. And so that grounding has become a foundation underneath my feet that's made it so I can sleep at night through a lot of ups and downs and craziness and moves and pandemics and, you know, almost going out of business and all kinds of crazy stuff has happened, you know, over the course of the past decade and change. And especially in the past, almost 20 years. He turned 19 last month. So to me, like, that's a long-winded way of saying that foundation in your family, that source of identity, that source of support, that source of knowledge, people who really know you and they know you because they live with you, because they love you, because they have skin in the game of your success. You know, in the best case scenario, right? Obviously, there's all kinds of broken, dysfunctional families, but that is the bedrock of being able to go out into the world and take risks and do things and stand up to authority and all the other stuff we care about. And it's the reason why the communists hate the family, always have written about it extensively, that they want to destroy it, that it's the institution that stays in the way of their creepy technocratic plans for all of us. And because they understand that the family is the place of safety and security for you as a person, that we can't be atomized individuals. Like, we are weak biologically. We are like soft and squishy and easy to kill. And so it's when we're together with people who have our back that we're strong. And the strongest unit, the base unit of community, is the family. And so if there's a philosophical thing there, it's that you don't have a free society without strong families. You don't. And you look to the societies that are least free, and they turned families against each other. I think in the Soviet Union, it was like at some point, 1 in 4 people in the Soviet Union were reporting on others, you know. And
Nazi Germany too. They were training the kids to report on their parents if their parents were speaking poorly against the Reich.
So that is what the face of pure evil looks like. It's to turn the family against itself, and to enlist people into the worst kind of selfishness. Even the base unit of socialization, the family, the bond between mother and father and son and daughter, is broken. So if we don't defend that with all our might to the death, that'll be the end of us. That'll be the end of the West. It'll be the end of the Enlightenment and everything else.
There's a couple of things that you're saying that are very interesting. One is the benefit in both directions generationally. Like, being a strong parent is important for the kids, which I want to get into in a second, but you're also talking about the benefit to the adult of being a parent, which people talk a lot about. Once you have kids, you become a more serious person, or your, perspective really changes. You become, obviously, you have to be pretty tough to be able to keep a little human alive, let alone raise it to be a competent adult. But the direction out, like the dual directionality of this is very interesting to me. But I also find it very interesting to think about not only the importance of the family unit in preserving freedom, but also in weaving the fabric of society. Like the values you instill in the home are more important than the values that are instilled anywhere else. And there's a lot of rabbit holes that we can go down with this. But I want to talk first about how you think about the role of the parent as a transferer of knowledge to their children, or just sort of a guardian and facilitator of a child's growth, because there's a lot that gets encompassed here. And I want to talk about that direction first, of as a parent, you are raising the next generation of a society.
Yeah.
And that future generation is going to hinge on what you do as a parent. How do you think about that side of it?
I think about it a lot. I mean, even in terms of our show, Dad Saves America, it is a kind of I don't know if political is the right term, but the Saves America part is that, like, there's a role as a father that is just internally rewarding, purpose creating, and essential. But the Saves America part is that role is pivotal in having the kind of thing that I think America ought to be, and that sort of was designed to be in its founding documents. That's the part of America I want to save. I want to save this. I think there is a city on the hill piece of America that's real. I don't think that's a story. I mean, it is a story in a certain sense, but it's a story that I think is true and real and essential. And we have to save it because it can be lost. Civilizations fall.
All the time. Every single one that's ever been has eventually fallen, except for the few recent ones that haven't yet.
And we're not that old. I mean, we're getting old. We're coming up on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration, right? So, but I think there's multi-layers here. So, like, what's my role as a parent in trying to transfer knowledge to my kids? Well, what isn't that, right? It's like, what does it mean to raise a person? I think we've specialized into a kind of lunatic society through our specialization in a certain sense. Like the notion that, school is where you learn. It's like, no, you learn all the time because we're a learning creature. Mm-hmm. School is a service provider, and not a very good one, for learning in theory. That's what they claim.
Along with many other services, like childcare.
Yeah, and then they basically bundled childcare and free lunches and psychotherapy by lunatics with a degree in nonsense and all kinds of stuff like that. And they force us to pay for it. And then they say, well, why don't you support this thing we force you to pay for? It's all this sort of bundle of nonsense. I know that's dismissive. Too bad. But at the end of the day, it's like, I am responsible. Me and my wife are responsible for setting our son, and for those of you with daughter, up to outlive us. So how are they going to outlive us? How are they going to have a good life? They're going to have a good life. They're going to outlive us by knowing how to navigate a changing world, be critical thinkers, have a moral compass that helps them understand how to make good decisions that they won't regret. So, because that's one of the other things, like at any given time, your decisions can be cloudy, and you need to be able to stop and say, well, wait, will my future self like this decision I'm about to make? And, I think the present Donald Trump is not feeling super great about the decisions he made in 2006, right? Even though the legal system's a disaster. but you could have avoided this if you didn't screw around on your wife. So like, I think there's, that's our job. Our job is to do that. And I don't think there's any boundaries on that. And I think anyone who tries to claim that we don't know what's best for our kids, or that it's not our job to educate our kids, it's the teacher's job, is full of it and can go pound sand. Because I'm sorry, you don't love my kid. I love my kid. You're not with my kid day and night. You don't have skin in the game of the future of my kid's success. You're with him for a year, a couple hours a week. So I don't want to hear any of that. And like, I think we have to take ownership of it. I think we have to regain responsibility for this as parents.
There's a huge discrepancy in the way that young people are taught, not by their parents, I don't think, but societally, to think about the value of their work raising kids. I think Austin's actually a really interesting case study of this, because there is a very large contingent of people who live here who are parents or aspiring parents who want raising a family to be an important part of their life's work. But it's also a city full of mid-20s to mid-30s people who work at tech companies who
it's
are
a young city.
Constantly, they're on the dating apps, they're going to parties, they're trying to find a partner, but they're not necessarily thinking about that as being their most important work. I know a lot of these people. It's a young city. You meet them all over. And it's like, there's many pieces to this, right? Like, dating in the 21st century is kind of hard. And then like,
I don't feel a guest of ours, Malcolm Collins, said he felt like he got on the last cop chopper out of Nam as far as getting married.
He didn't. People are still happily finding their partners and getting married. It wasn't the last one, but his point is well heard.
If you want me to sound like an aging boomer, talk about the apps that involved. I can't even remember which direction the swiping is supposed to happen, because I've never been on these things.
You count yourself lucky. They're not great.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is like, I grew up homeschooled. I didn't go to college. I was very outside of the cultural milieu in a lot of ways, but it was still strong enough that even though no one was directly telling me, like, you need to have a career to be happy, it was not clear-cut and obvious to me that having kids is like a valuable thing to do. I always knew I wanted to have a family. I was raised by a stay-at-home mom. Like, the model was very clear to me. But the culture tells you that, like, your innovative accomplishments are your important work, not raising children. It's like, you could go build a company or become a partner at a firm or write a best-selling novel, or you could like raise 2 or 3 people to contribute to society. Like, it doesn't feel like a comparable trade. Talk about that.
Well, I think it's morally demented that any young woman in particular is told that this is something that she should not consider a wonderful, amazing experience, first and foremost, because I think it is young women who bear the brunt of this messaging about families.
Well, we're the ones for whom it is an either or. And it's not always an either or, but it comes with more concessions. Like, we're the ones who have to feed the baby in the middle of the night. So we're the ones who have to decide, do I want to give up my forward momentum in my career for years or even decades, depending on how many children I have, for raising a couple of people who are going to sap my youth and my beauty and my energy and my social life. Like, before you have the kids, it feels like a tough trade. There are so many women in Austin who freeze their eggs thinking, like, maybe if I find the right person, I'll have kids, and I want to keep the option open. But like, right now I'm focused on my career. Very common. You hear it all the time.
Okay, so there's a bunch of layers here.
I just dumped a lot on you.
So So I'll start personally.
Mm-hmm.
So I met my wife at work. My wife is 6.5 years older than me. So she had already had a lot more life experience. She had traveled all over the country.
How old were you when you met your wife?
It was in 2001. So I was born in 77.
77,
How old the hell
2001,
is it?
24.
24?
Right? 24, I think.
Yeah. Is that right?
I don't know. My math, my brain math
I used
is
to be
fast,
great at math, but like
always.
basic arithmetic, John Mackey cleans the clock with. We'll play board games together, and he'll like do it in his head. I'm like, how are you doing that? Anyway, I was pretty young. So we met in the work context. We're both like workaholics, and we've done everything together. So we started Emergent Order together. We, have partnered in like this wood is her choice.
She has a good eye for design. It's very beautiful.
Everyone here knows that like she's got the most powerful and I think on point intuition about all kinds of things all the time. So this notion that there's enormous trade-offs we all face in all the choices we make. And women face trade-offs by choosing to stay home with their kids and take a step back from work when that's the choice. Absolutely. And men face the opposite trade-off. I think one of the things that's interesting to me about this is the notion that getting to give birth to a child and have that experience and that bond and that love is only talked about in terms of cost. That's crazy and evil.
It's very deeply culturally ingrained.
And it's crazy and evil because Lisa ultimately decided to stay home with Matteo, and then she went back briefly, and she was like, "I can't be away from my son, and I have to be with him." Mm-hmm. And that was what she wanted, and frankly, becoming the sole breadwinner at that moment, we were like had an apartment in Hoboken and working in New York City, and like making like $130,000 and feeling like making $30,000 because the cost of living was so damn high. We were like basically on a monthly basis falling behind, and then I would like squeak through the year by picking up a side hustle job. So like the notion that, man, I got empowered, I'm the man, and aren't I like a patriarch or something? It's like, no, this was a bunch of trade-offs on every dimension. I chose at every step to be as involved in my son's life as possible. So I've always done morning duty with him. And that's also because like Lisa's more of a night owl. She likes to sleep in. I like to wake up early, or I do now. But it's every bit as much a blessing that she got to have all that time with my son. I'm kind of jealous of the relationship she got to have with my son. Like, I mean that in the best possible way. And she sees it that way because she voluntarily made that choice. I didn't tell her, you should do this. If anything, it was like, okay, well, we'll figure out how to make this work financially. The fact that the society can't grapple with the complexity of that and the fact that there's cost and benefits on both sides is just like a sign of how like our cultural tastemakers are just so fundamentally immature and goofy, and like they come out of these ridiculous schools. It's like this is like a great example of how our so-called educated culture has become like a land of toxic waste to me.
Well, it's a vicious cycle because when you go through the school system, the whole thing is very explicitly structured as career prep. Nobody's ever asking you, do you want to be a stay-at-home mom? Maybe you should take more English classes so you can like be exposed to more books that you want to read to your kids. Like nobody's proposing that sort of trajectory. Everything, you go to the guidance counselor and they give you this little like color-coded career aptitude test and you fill out the questionnaire and they're like, maybe you should be a nurse. And it's like very soulless and very detached from actually getting to know a child and as an individual and what they're interested in and what they might be good at. But it's all focused on career paths. And so from a very early age, it's instilled in you that you're on a path to be working until retirement, whether you're a boy or a girl. And the culture is structured in a way where even like within pop culture, the people who are venerated are the ones who are doing productive work, and being a stay-at-home mom doesn't count as productive work. It's sort of looked down upon. It's like, oh, you're only a stay-at-home mom. One of my really good friends here in Austin got married very young, at like 20, I think. And she'd been like, she was a very early bloomer when it came to like working and self-efficacy. She made a slide deck to convince her parents to let her drop out of middle school and unschool herself.
She sounds amazing.
She is. They were impressed by the slide deck. It worked. She's the oldest of 5. She's the only one who did that. Everybody else liked school. But she was like, I need to get out of here. I am going to be more productive and learn more if I can read by myself all day. And her parents were like, okay, we're sold. So she'd like go to downtown Austin with her dad and sit in his office and like read economics books while he was working. You would love her. And then she started, just really quickly, she started working, I think like at 15 or 16, she got a remote startup job. And so she was like doing the whole career thing from like 15 to 20-ish. And then she got married and her husband was like, okay, it's like not really, they wanted to have kids. He was like, take some time just for you before we do that. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, I can support both of us. And she would go to parties and it would always feel like she'd tell people, like, they'd be like, oh, well, what do you do? And she's like, I'm a housewife right now. And everybody kind of be like, oh. And then they talk to the next person, what do you do? And they're like, oh, I'm working for such and such startup. And they're like, oh, cool. And this was among people who are like, quote unquote, based, who like are very in favor of like the housewife and the stay-at-home mom idea. But it's really culturally ingrained. I know you had something that you wanted to say in response to that, if you want to go.
Well, the first thing I want to say is like, I can't help in hearing about your friend, how she's a perfect example of the lunacy of our elite class, because the elite educated class, the sociologists, they believe that human beings are born as a blank slate. And I don't know how you can call yourself a serious person and look at reality for 10 minutes and think that. Because here you have, like, you said she was one of 5?
She's the oldest of 5.
So she's the oldest of 5, and she's doing the craziest sounding thing of her own accord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nobody like planted this idea. She was just like, this was before she made friends who agreed with her on any of this. She was like, school is a waste of my time. I don't want to be here. Pitch deck will convince the parents.
Like, most people don't even encounter a pitch deck until they get into like the corporate world. So here she is through and I'm a person of faith. I think we have a unique soul. So I believe that. And I think that this is an example of where it's like, I don't think that's a function of the randomness of the game of life. I think that is a unique person with dignity that is a person, and they are born with a lot of who they are right from the get-go. And that's obvious. And so I think we live in this time where so many people in positions of authority and alleged expertise invalidate themselves profoundly, like right before our eyes. And we don't even like stop to say, wait a second, you believe that? Like, why should I listen to anything you say? Wait, you think people are born a blank slate and just can be made into whatever you want them to be, and it's all socially constructed? It's like, you've spent no time with any children then. So I'm supposed to still listen to you? I'm supposed to listen to what you think is the right thing for my life? No, I'm not going to do that. The older I get, I'm in some reverse aging process philosophically. I get in some ways more radical over time. So it is super interesting when you have a really cool job that you're doing super neat stuff. And yes, every human being capable of procreating can do it. And so at one level, it's like, well, it's not that interesting to be a human and have kids, because anybody can do that. An imbecile can have kids. I mean, I'm sort of being a jerk, but I mean, there is a certain sense in which, sure, that's true. Anyone can have kids. You meet morons that have kids all the time. So why is that interesting? Until you have kids and then you realize like you're now suddenly in this different category of experiencing the miracle. And those people that are scoffing look idiotic and ignorant. And it's just because they're not experiencing it at some level. It's like, well, they're focused on the thing they care about. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. Great. We need everybody. We need all the things. So I think the notion that there's a one path to success or to fulfillment is part of the problem. It's this sort of notion of standards.
Sounds almost like my critique of public school.
Well, it is. It's like, well, let me get this straight. You know, having spent 12 years going on 13 in New York City and getting on that subway, and you look around and you just see the massive diversity along every possible dimension of humans in that city, which is one of the reasons why I love that city. And you're going to tell me there's like a one size fits all solution path to success and happiness? No. No one should think that. That's a stupid thought. And it turns out that we're kind of miserable. We're more miserable than we should be as a society for how wealthy we are. So don't tell me that your path has turned out great culturally, because it kind of hasn't. Like there's a lot of room for improvement on the achieving a sense of satisfaction and happiness, and use whatever term you want, Aristotle's eudaimonia, whatever. But I don't know anyone who on their deathbed said, man, I wish I worked more. Oh, I really wish I just spent more time at the office. People don't think that. Some people might. So I love my job. I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. I love what I do. But I know I'm not going to be on my deathbed thinking, I wish I had more time at work. So you've got to balance that with other things, you know, and it's just childish immaturity to like lift your nose at a mom. It's like, you sound like an idiot. You sound like a child. And so I laugh at those people, frankly, internally.
Just internally?
Increasingly externally, because I do think we have reached a point where those of us that hold these beliefs have to be completely unashamed of the fact that there's a truth that we understand and that that's stupid and childish. And you can have whatever life you want. Don't judge other people for wanting to live the life that we are actually genetically coded to live, which is to procreate and keep going. Like, what's crazy about that? Why are you scoffing at that? I don't get it.
You're a marketer and a filmmaker, but you think about marketing and getting ideas out into the world.
Yeah, in a certain sense, for sure.
What is, besides this, if we take the conversation that we're having, the types of conversations that you have on your show, if we take that off the table for a second, because I know that otherwise, like that is a big part of the answer. But beyond that, what is in your mind the antidote to the often very overwhelming cultural milieu that suggests, not even always explicitly, but very implicitly through the entire way that the society is structured and how we raise our children, that growing up to just be a mom, if you are a female, is going to either not be enough in the eyes of society, or on a very personal level is going to leave you feeling depleted and unfulfilled. And you'll look at women who didn't have children and the freedom and career success that they've had, and you will envy that is the inevitable track if you become a mother, that being a stay-at-home mom is not, or a housewife is like not enough. And on the flip side, for young men, that maybe having a family isn't taking away all of the fun of being a free individual out in the world, and that it is actually going to be one of the most valuable modes of personal and spiritual and psychological development that you could possibly go through, and can perhaps be a stabilizer and a career accelerator for the things that you want to do. Like, how do you combat everything that is, you know, the counterforce in the culture besides conversations like this?
It's a big question. Well, I guess the first thing is, I don't claim to have some special answer for what any given person or couple should do to find happiness in their life. I don't think there is one answer.
I agree.
So that's the first thing.
I agree. I'm not an absolutist about this,
Yeah.
but it also should be a thing that's on the table that's not being judged.
Yeah, I think the fact that the answer that is probably going to be true for most people, which is having a family, is going to be the most fulfilling thing in their life. It won't be the only thing, and they won't have to give up everything else. But the fact that there's such a strong push to sort of denigrate that, the fact that the football player, I did a reaction video on him, but Butker,
Harrison Butker.
Harrison Butker. The fact that Harrison Butker's speech, which was like a doctrinaire Catholic speech, number one, at a super conservative Catholic college, but the fact that that was controversial was a sign of how sort of diseased our society is on these issues. I think you have to raise your kids. I think you have to raise your own kids to be independent thinkers and instill your values in them as much as possible. That's what I see my job as a parent, more than anything else. And even at the level of career, as an employer myself, I hire on the basis of values before skills. So being conscientious, having a work ethic, sweating the small stuff, having integrity, being honest, being willing to admit that you're wrong, having a sense of humility, having a sense that you can learn. These are the actual skills that make you succeed in life. Because if you have those things and if you have persistence, most people can succeed beyond their own expectations, let alone the expectations of the various wannabes and losers that judge them along the way. That's just a fact. And you just have to meet the millionaire next door who didn't go to school and built a lawn business empire, or the guy that discovered that these lights, these white LED lights, were supposed to be impossible, according to the physicists. And then like some tinkerer discovered you can make white LED. It was believed that white LED was impossible, that it was like the physics, it doesn't work. This is just physics. And then along comes some tinkerer guy and is like, there it goes. So I just think we have to smash all of that to pieces. And I am kind of conservative in the sense that I do think a lot of the old ways are going to work for most people, which is like, grow up, get married, have kids, and you're going to be happier than if you don't. I think social scientifically, that actually turns out to be true. I had Brad Wilcox on the show. The data supports that. Married men make more money. Married women often make more money. Like the career, I had Jeff Sandifer on the show, who's a dear friend of mine. And him and Laura Sandifer founded Acton Academy, where my son went to school, radical school. And, you know, he saw firsthand the other path that is like the approved path, which is, go to the brand name college, come out and work for like Deloitte or Goldman Sachs. And now you've made it and you're at a dinner party in Lower Manhattan and you work for Goldman Sachs and you're making $350 a year as a 27-year-old. And there's nothing wrong with that. Finance is great. But there's a lot of people that go into that unthinkingly and they aren't passionate about finance. They just thought they had to do this because this is the path that they had been deprived of the opportunity of self-discovery that could have led them to real passions or even just real intrigue. And instead sort of were smart enough to make their way to this. And then a couple of years later, they burn out on it and become urban farmers and do all kinds of other stuff because they're lost. And now they're 35 and it's like, what did I do with myself? So I think we have to build a free society like one person at a time. We have to be the kind of friend that when everyone else is snickering, we say, you tell those people, like, ignore them. They're just jerks. they don't know anything. You're taking the path you want to take, and good for you. We have to kind of live our values at every step in every relationship. I don't know what else to do. We can't vote our way to a better world. Like, good luck with that.
Wait, say more. Really? No, I'm kidding. Have you met Paul Millard?
No, I haven't.
He's based here in Austin part-time. He lives here, but he's pretty nomadic. I had him on the show a couple months ago. He and his wife are good friends of mine. Your story about the Goldman Sachs person who burns out before he's 30 reminded me of this. He has a very similar story that he wrote a book about that went pretty viral on Twitter. It was like a self-published book, and I think he sold 50,000 copies.
Oh, wow.
Like really, really exceptional, like guerrilla marketing effort. But the book, it's called The Pathless Path, and it's about his story of going to a very prestigious college and getting a very prestigious consulting job because that's just what you were supposed to do. And then realizing that it was just like killing him from the inside out. And he like quit, and quit to the level that he like gave back a signing bonus to, like, he paid them back to be able to leave because he was just like, I can't do this anymore. And he like became a nomad. He became a writer. He got married and had a kid. And he just like tells this story of how the path that you were supposed to be on was just like so crushing to him. And it clearly resonates because he's sold 50,000 copies. Like he'll tweet this fairly regularly. People will send him pictures of like, hey, I saw somebody on the plane reading your book. Like, here's a picture of it.
That's awesome.
Like, it became this little micro phenomenon. Maybe 50,000 is too small to call a micro phenomenon.
It's a nano phenomenon.
Yeah, there we go. Because it spoke to people because they felt this on a deep level.
I mean, look, I went to Penn State, and I got out of school, and I got a job at MTV in New York City. And that was super exciting. And for a decade plus, I worked my butt off and slept at the office many, many times. And it was awesome. It was awesome. I had incredible bosses. I got to do awesome work. I got to stretch myself. I got to learn from people. Like, I am not saying like everyone should become a crunchy granola weirdo. And I say that with nothing but love. I sent my son to a Waldorf school.
You live in Austin, you know?
It's like when we moved here, we put him in Austin Waldorf school, which looks like what you would imagine if Gilligan's Island was a story about a bunch of hippies that crashed. It's like, that was what it looked like. A bunch of 60s, 70s hippies crash on an island. 30 years later, instead of being dead, they've built a little utopia, and it's called Austin Waldorf School. And so I love that. If there's nothing wrong with taking a corporate path in a large organization, if that's what you want, and if you're good at it and it's fulfilling. Like, I think we often fall into the trap when we're sort of heterodox of being like, down with all of that. No, it's just like, that's one of many paths. And you can also go down that path and it be fulfilling right up until it's not. Because you've changed, because you've spent a decade in a thing, and now you're ready for something else. There's this weird, and I think it's weird, especially at the moment that my son is entering now as like he's graduating high school. There's like, well, now you go to college and then your life starts. It's like, I think your life starts at conception, but I think your life starts when you are a person and you are alive. And it is just a series of learning and experience and relationships until you're dead. And there's milestones, but the notion that like you're sort of not living life if you're doing this versus that, I don't buy it. I think that people aggregate around standards voluntarily for a reason. There are certain things that turn out to work or work pretty well and then start to not work because people get lazy. So this is the nature of the firm, right? You have a company and it starts off and it's a ragtag bunch of people that want to change the world. And they have this product that's 10x better than everything else. And they do it and they get it out there. And then they've got a legion of hardcore fans that are super excited about this new technology or new product or whatever. And then they cross the chasm into the mainstream and now it becomes the thing. You got to remember, like the iPhone. When the iPhone came out, there's this sort of classic video of Steve Ballmer, who was the CEO of Microsoft at the time, laughing at it. $600 and it doesn't even have a keyboard, so it won't be good for business users. And it became like a joke that he did this thing, that he laughed at the thing that now everything is. And because I think to everyone else, they saw it and was like, this is the coolest thing in the world. Oh my God, this is like what do you can do this pinching and zooming? That's like that movie Minority Report. Like, so then you do that and you cross the chasm and then you go mainstream. And now you start to have bureaucracy and you get bigger and you start to have HR processes and you start to become the target of lawsuits. And like there's a life cycle to everything. And it's good and then it's not good. And then you've got to reinvent yourself and then you go to the next. And like, why don't we teach our kids about this? Why don't we teach our kids about the path that life takes and the case studies of life? Because I think if you present and I think like middle school is not a bad place to start. If you present kids with the case studies of the different kinds of incredible lives that have been lived, you put enough in front of them and they realize, wow, there are a lot of paths I can take in my life. And I can actually be on the path right up until the point I decide I want to take a different road. And that's okay. How is that not being educated? If anything other than that feels like not educated to me.
Today's episode is brought to you by the John Galt Mortgage Company. Anybody who knows me well knows that I'm a fan of Ayn Rand's novels. And so I was incredibly excited when I found out my friends were starting a mortgage company named after John Galt. And I was even more excited when I found out what that mortgage company does. My friends Mitch and Tim have been working in the real estate world for years, and they realized over time that mortgages are way more expensive than they need to be. So they decided to start a new kind of mortgage, one that caps their profit on every transaction and passes the savings along to you, the buyer, in the form of a lower interest rate. I am not currently in the market for a house, but when I am, I will absolutely be working with Mitch and Tim as my lender. And if you are in the market for a house, you should absolutely check out what they're doing and get a quote for the rates that they can offer you. You can find their work at www.johngaltmortgage.com, or you can find a link to their site down in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. What you're saying feels very parallel to a lot of the criticisms that I make of the public education system and the way we treat education, particularly in America, but honestly on a global scale, where there's a one-size-fits-all path that appears to have variance, because you can choose to be a STEM kid. You can choose to be heavily focused on history. You can choose to be on an AP track. You can choose to go to community college or try to get into an Ivy League. You can choose to be on like pre-med or pre-law. You can choose to take one of these career preparedness tracks that's going to spit you out into all different sorts of careers. So it feels highly varied, but it's all a singular system, and we're trying to fit everyone into it. And the building blocks of it, the core sort of things that you have to do to succeed inside the system, are extremely standardized, which means they really weren't designed to tailor fit anyone, and they're designed to the mean. So they're going to sort of meet you at the middle of where the population is at large, and some people are going to fit better than others, and it's not going to fit anybody exactly right. And then we have all of these kids and young adults who are horribly struggling inside of the system, and they grow up thinking that they're stupid, or that they're like not good at school, or just not very intelligent, which is such a tragedy for a child to grow up with this huge self-esteem issue that's inflicted on them by a system that they were forced to try to fit. And they see these paths that look like a buffet of options, but really aren't. And if none of them fit you quite right, you think it's a you problem and not a system problem.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about, like, it's easier to sort of pinpoint it when you're talking about the schooling system, because you can really, like, lots of people have dissected this and written about it and like made it very clear. They put it into language that we can all interchangeably use and understand. And, you know, a system's a very tangible thing to, like, it has a process to it. It has buildings and you can critique it. And what you're talking about feels very similar, but a little more ephemeral. It's a little harder to put your fingers on and be like, okay, this is exactly what is happening, but it feels like a very similar phenomenon that you're describing.
Well, I think that as I started going down this journey, really in a way, the areas I was concerned with and found fascinating began to change from like being sort of systems oriented and economics interested to being interested in the way psychology interacts with that. Probably because of Jonathan Haidt and Jordan Peterson more than to any other people. And I think that led me to see a couple things as being fundamental, which is, and like, this is like psychology 101, but having an internal locus of control is so fundamentally important. And what is that? It's believing that your choices matter and that you have agency, that I can choose. I can choose how to respond to my circumstances. I can choose what to think, even though thoughts pop into our head, which is also kind of weird. Like when we observe a thought pop into our head, where did that come from? That's complete. How do I have a thing that observes another thing in my head? That's real weird. But I ultimately I ultimately choose how I respond emotionally to what other people say and do to me, even though I feel like I can't because my emotions occur at stimulus response, but I still ultimately choose. So that's the internal locus of control. And basically this basic idea underpins happiness. Happy people have an internal locus of control. Unhappy people, anxious people don't.
Have you read Peter Gray, just very quickly?
Oh, yeah. And I interviewed Peter Gray, actually.
Yeah, very, very similar.
Yeah. Free to Learn. Incredible book. He's awesome.
Very similar idea.
And in that book, one of the things he talks about is that play is how children learn. And it has been the way they've always learned. And he looks at in like sort of indigenous, I find this sort of silly word, but it's like, well, indigenous in what time period? But sort of, simpler peoples.
Mm-hmm. The hunter-gatherers.
Hunter-gatherers and tribes, pre-industrial societies and communities. What you will find is, right, basically starting around the age of reason, like 7 to 10, they kind of form little bands and play at what the adults do. So the boys go around throwing spears and playing like hunter, and yes, on average, the little girls make dolls. You can do this now. You can on average, you can give a little girl a toy truck and she will turn it into a baby carriage on average. Not all the time. It's a curve. Some will say, I want to take this car apart, like my best friend Courtney, who's now an engineer, and say like, and her and I were both playing Legos together. But on average, if you're going to close your eyes and guess and throw a dart, you're probably going to land on playing with dolls or throwing spears and beating each other up, boys and girls. So that play is really interesting because play is how we learn, according to Peter. And I think that's absolutely true. Then you look at the fact that we don't tend to remember things that we don't find useful or interesting. So, Mike Gibson, who wrote The Paper Belt on Fire, talks about this in his book and in all his writing. He runs a 1517 fund, which invests in basically college dropouts.
Good friend of mine. I've had him on the show.
He's a member of our board, dear friend, great guy, terrific. And he's like, yeah, you look at all the pedagogical study data and people don't remember anything. They take a class and like 1% remember any of it like relatively recently after completing the class. So then what do we remember? Well, we remember the things that we find interesting and important. And that's just a fact. And it's amazing how much we can remember when we find it interesting and important. The things we can conjure in our mind, that somewhere in those recesses, it's there because we found it interesting and important, or because we played with it. And like none of that has any, it's as if in our current school system, which was inspired by these like proto-Nazi Prussians that wanted to basically make sure that the next generation of soldiers wouldn't abandon their post, and then got, adopted by the Rockefellers as like, this is a great way to make sure that in this sort of early industrial era, they won't abandon their slot as Rosie the Riveter, our beloved Rosie the Riveter. Those jobs are freaking boring for the most part.
Yeah, but her bandana was cool.
Yeah, she was awesome. Love Rosie the Riveter. But if you really wish we could get back to 1950s manufacturing jobs, I think you should try one for a while and see how much you like being Rosie the Riveter.
Wait, are people really arguing to bring back 1950s manufacturing jobs?
Isn't that most of the right and the left now? It's like Elizabeth Warren and Orrin Cass are like arm in arm, like, we ought to bring back industrial manufacturing to the United States so we can rebuild the middle class like Rosie the Riveter. It's like, okay, all right. Those jobs kind of suck. I'm sorry, they do. I mean, every job is good. Every job has dignity. It's like, not every job's got to be super interesting. I'm a guy that likes to work with my hands, but like assembly line, I'm glad robots do that. So we just don't, we don't have a system that supports any of the things that the people that seem to honestly want to understand learning do. Like, we don't have a system built on play. We don't have a system built on a large degree of self-direction so that your interests can help guide you.
Or even learning science, like all of the research that's been done over the past 5 decades around how people retain knowledge, things like spaced repetition and active recall, like none of that's implemented in the classroom. And it's because it's not scalable with a teacher in front of the classroom model, but no one's even tried. Like AI is going to change all of that very quickly.
Yeah, I actually think that the education space is probably the place for the most amount of AI optimism insofar as as I understand it, and this is mostly from people like Michael Strong and Mike Gibson, one-on-one instruction works and has always been the thing that works.
It works brilliantly because you can tailor exactly to where the child is and move at exactly their pace.
And we had this whole, so like there's all these stories we tell in America that are just ahistoric. Oh, the Northeast, like in Massachusetts, they were great because they had the first public school system, and Horace Mann is such a saint. It's like Massachusetts had 98% literacy before there were public schools.
Nobody likes that part of the story.
It's like they already had it. It's like, if anything, this was like the success. This was like the innovator's dilemma. They were already a hyper-educated culture. And then they decided to wreck it by building public schools. And they wanted to try to like get the damn dirty Catholics to like abandon the Pope. That was really what it boiled down to. How do we give this away for free? Because we got all these Irish and Catholics coming in, and they're papists, and they're not going to be good American Nordics like the rest of us. Blah, blah, blah. Give them away school for free. I mean, the best thing about real history is the people who I do think are ultimately, they had their own version of good intentions, but I still consider them fundamentally to be villains. They said all the bad stuff out loud.
If you look through the documents of the people who founded our public education system, it's quite shocking.
They're horrible. It's like you read John Taylor Gatto and he brings the receipts, and the receipts are gross. This is like a bunch of creepy eugenics and central planning weirdos that don't particularly like children or humanity.
No, and they just want everybody to be quiet and stay in their lane. Yeah. There's I'm going to butcher the paraphrase of this, but there's a quote that's like I think it's from like the founding documents of the Board of Education or something like that, where they're like, we are not going to try to raise poets and artists because we already have a vast supply, referring to like all of the children going to private schools of the founding class. It's like we don't need them to be creative. It's going to distract from their manufacturing jobs.
There's a great guy. I've known him for a while named James Tooley. You've probably heard of his book, The Beautiful Tree. He had been like a radical Marxist that worked for Robert Mugabe. He's a Brit. And at some point he discovered that, and I believe he started in India, in like the equivalent to a favelas in India, the sort of slums, that the majority of desperately poor people in India, and then he proceeded to travel all around the world and find basically all around the world, the poorest of the poor are getting better educated in for-profit private schools that $2 a day families pay for with their own money, even though there is a free public school in their area. Why? Because the free public school sucks.
It's actually really surprising. Like so many kids in India go to private school.
And so you hear this thing in America that like, oh, if you're like a radical like us and you want to abolish the public school system because it's basically it's everything the left says they hate about colonialism and capitalism. It's like it is literally an actual system of conformity and oppression. The public school system. That we somehow hate the poor, or we want people to slip through the cracks. It's like, well, number one, the poorest of the poor are being better educated by private schools worldwide. So you're just wrong. Like if I'm going to pull out my falsification tool, your theory is busted. Second, I lived in New Jersey for years. And in some ways, I almost feel like I'm from Jersey because I would spend every summer on the Jersey Shore. New Jersey has a system in which the poorest school districts actually spend the most money per student. It was a series of rulings called the Abbott rulings by the Supreme Court of New Jersey, basically saying like, well, our state constitution says that we are obligated to provide a good education. And through interpretation of that, they forced the New Jersey school system to really be highly redistributing in terms of financial resources. So like Newark, New Jersey, I think they might be spending north of $40,000 per student per year. And you think, okay, that's a lot of friggin' money. Where does it all go? Because the schools are terrible. And actually like Cory Booker, when he was the mayor of Newark, was really like a pro school choice guy because he was seeing it firsthand as the mayor of the city. And I won't for a second back down from the moral high ground that we need to pull our kids out of these schools, put them in something different. We need to be warriors to defund this catastrophe and arm families to the best extent possible with other options.
Okay, let's pivot.
Sounds good.
I want to talk about Emergent Order.
Okay.
I want to talk first about the organization that you've built over the past decade and change. And then we'll talk about the philosophical concept second. But first of all, I want to hear about what you've been up to besides Dad Saves America. You talked a little bit in the beginning about the type of work you were doing and then you pivoted, but tell me the story.
Sure. So I make these rap videos pitting John Maynard Keynes and Friedrich Hayek against each other together with Russ Roberts, my favorite, one of the OGs of podcasting. His Econ Talk podcast goes all the way back to 2006, which is now, gosh, almost 20 years of podcasting. So he's amazing. Good friend. And I'm motivated by that because the financial crisis happens and I want to understand it. Because now I'm a dad and I have my son and I have a mortgage. So I'm kind of paying attention to things like interest rates and asset markets. And oh my God, am I going to be bankrupted by the collapse of the economy? And holy cow, like downtown Manhattan is being occupied by people saying they want communism. Like, didn't the wall just fall? Like not that long ago? Like I thought we were kind of past this. And so I make these videos and they take off, and for the first time, really, I realized that there's an entrepreneurial spark. Mm-hmm. I'm like, wow, there's a need to try to explore these ideas I increasingly care about and think I understand about liberty, about economics, about the mechanisms that societies use to actually flourish versus collapse. And so my wife and I and my best friend Josh start Emergent Order to basically produce content that I would say is broadly classical liberal in its founding principles, and explore those things in as many different weird and funny ways as possible. So I made a series of sort of 90s-esque faux kids commercials attacking cronyism, called The Cronies. We actually have the 3D prints of the action figures we made. Bangkor the Prophet and Captain Corn, the corn subsidy mandate superhero, can turn into any useless product you can imagine, from ethanol to sugar alternatives. And so that was the idea. Like, how can we bring this love of producing fun, visually well-produced content and big ideas that I think really matter and are often only really talked about by academics in ways that are kind of inaccessible to more people. And that's still what we do. So in 2021, we launched Emergent Order Foundation, which is the home of Dad Saves America. And in every instance, I'm trying to explore these basic ideas. Like, our mission statement is that, through heroic storytelling that models classical virtues and hopefully moves our audience to purposeful action, we want to, build a movement that champions civilization and celebrates the best of America, American freedom. And I don't think I don't only care about America, but I do think America is special. And I think we have to try to protect and strengthen that, the best part of it. And so that's what we're doing at every turn. Right now, we've got our Dad Saves America show, which I host. And then we're launching later this year, or relaunching the rap battles. So I really believe, even though I'm a deeply ideological person that is prone towards bombast, that it's actually that like, if you can't understand the other perspective, then you don't really understand much at all. And that was like those Keynes Hayek rap videos get used by teachers, most of whom on average are reasonable people. If you look at and you pick any random public school and survey the teachers, at least the older ones. I think maybe the younger ones have been put through a different kind of nutcase factory, frankly. But I'll try to be charitable, say, okay, even the young ones, maybe even the late Gen Z teachers maybe aren't all nuts. They're not all on TikTok saying nonsense. They're basically a reflection of their community, politically and otherwise, more or less. They probably lean a little more left on average than the community because of the education path that they take to be a teacher. But these videos get used like crazy. And the reason I think they get used like crazy is because they steel man two sides of an argument. They strive to make the best arguments. They strive to be proportional and playful and fair and fun, and don't use any cuss words. And as a result, there are millions of kids who've been exposed to Austrian economics. There's probably more high schoolers that have been exposed to Hayek and Austrian economics by way of these raps than all the econ grads of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, who went to schools like Chicago combined. And so I want to do more of that and tackle a broader range of subjects, from, immigration to, American history to, is there a climate crisis? Climate crisis. I don't think there's a crisis, but that doesn't mean we can't actually do the work to make the strongest version of the argument for the notion that there is a climate crisis. Because if we can't do that, then how do we know that we're right if we think there isn't? Like, this is what learning should be. And so that's what Emergent Order, as fundamentally an educational institution that likes to use storytelling and high quality video, is all about.
Tell me about the name. I think for any libertarian who's listening, it's obvious, but I want to talk about the idea of Emergent Order very broadly first, and then we'll come back and apply it to some of the things that we've been talking about already.
Sure. So
Let's get nerdy.
I can nerd out on this forever. Well, okay. So what is it? So there's order, which, what does that mean? It means structure. It means structure that has utility, perhaps. So, something can be ordered so that it's pleasing to look at because it's symmetrical, but something can be ordered like a line so that people know who comes next, and that's a purpose to the structure. And so that's order. And then there's emergent, which is things coming about spontaneously, unplanned. And so when you take these two things together, they seem like, well, how do they live together as words even? Because you've got unplanned and spontaneous, and then you've got structured and purposeful. Huh? Isn't this just an oxymoron? It's like, well, no. It's actually the most important idea in economics and social organization you can grapple with. It is actually the nature of all of reality. And what do I mean by that? Well, we are here speaking to each other in English. There is no designer of the English language. No one designed it. It isn't planned. The documentation of the English language, including Merriam-Webster's dictionary, is an after-the-fact recording of the emergent process of language creation that has been going on for the entire history of the English language. But there is no planner. Even the French, they try to plan French. They have like ministries, because really, like, if you look at it, all the commie nonsense all kind of ends up going back to France and like the salons of France. It's like Pol Pot like went to France and then went back home and killed a third of his population. So the French have got a lot of trouble. They got a lot of baggage when it comes to trying to plan other people's lives, including their own language. But they can't even plan their language because, you look at no one, even though the people, actually, Googling is a perfect example. So, Sergey Brin and Larry Page desperately did not want us to use Google as a verb. Just like the people of Kleenex brand did not want people to say, get me a Kleenex to mean a tissue. And that's because it sounds like, well, why wouldn't you want that? You're like universal. Well, when you become universal, you actually cease to be able to be a copyright. So if you're actually like a copyright holder of Google.com, you want people saying web search. You don't want them saying, let's Google that. It's actually like a cost. You could lose your copy. You could lose your trademark if you become generic. And yet, despite the creators of the names, Google and Kleenex, we say Google that. We say hand me a Kleenex, even though it's just a generic tissue box from Costco. There are no planners of language. So what's language? Well, language is the entire structure of how we communicate and think in our minds. So if that's not an order, I don't know what is. And yet there is no planner or designer of that order. And it is the mediating order of all of human social reality. That's emergent order. I can go on and on with examples, but I think language is the most powerful one because you can't escape its foundational basis. If the notion that if something's really important, there needs to be like a czar or an agency or, a regulator. It's like, well, I think language is a pretty important thing, and there's no czar of language. There's no planner. There's no regulator. And everybody that tries to be the regulator of language are instantly, obviously villains because you just look at what's happening in like the countries that don't have a First Amendment, and they're literally imprisoning people for saying women are adult human females. Like, so that's what happens. That's what the planners want to do. But emergence is freedom. It's freedom. So then you say, okay, I can stop there if you want to dive into that deeper. I can keep going.
Keep going.
Okay. So what are the limits of that? Well, let's expand that out. So, okay, language is emergent, an example of an emergent order that's a foundational tool of civilization. it actually permeates everything, because first of all, we don't even know how our minds operate. So if you don't believe in a soul and God, then you have to believe that our consciousness in some sense is emergent out of something, out of some process. A different way to say emergent order is evolution. So what is evolution? Evolution is survival in a fitness environment through a process of random mutation, right? That's a rough explanation of it. Like, oh, you go to Galapagos Islands, you notice that there's birds with long beaks whose beak mirror the shape of the tulip that they feed. Why? Because those are the descendants of the birds that happen to randomly have the longer beaks and thus could get more calories and survive and have offspring. So the shape of the bird is a product of an emergent process of trial and error. You go out into the ocean and you see a bunch of boats floating in the ocean. What you don't see is there's a bunch of boats that sunk to the bottom. So even when you have architecture and planning, because the boat didn't just evolve out of, the boat's not a being, the boat is a product of planning, human planning, an architect, a designer, but the boat's survival is the result of a broader, larger, emergent order, which is the ocean and its vicissitudes. And will it survive a heavy storm? Will it survive being raided by pirates? Does it have high enough walls to survive the pirating? Whatever. But like, the point is, even when we see planning, because we are a planning creature, it's actually what makes us pretty distinct, is that we can plan and create. Our plans are still fundamentally validated, ultimately, in an order that is not planned. We have global anarchy. There is no one world government. So even at the level of the planetary governance, and gosh, that's the trial and error part is so essential to understanding why this concept's important. Because if you come back to this evolution, and Matt Ridley, who we've had on the show a while back, and he's a friend, and he's written about this extensively. He's got a great book called The Evolution of Everything that talks about this. But if you stop to think of your own self and you say, okay, I don't know what I'm capable of. And none of us actually know what we're capable of. Like, we actually don't. And I can prove that to anyone, because anyone that's capable of speech can conjure a moment where they did something they didn't think they could do. They climbed a tree higher than they thought they had the guts to climb. They drew a picture that was better than they thought they could draw. Across the board, they overcame their self-doubts. They got better at a thing. They didn't think they could learn a language and they learned it. We don't know what we're capable of. So if you start there, it's a form of it. We don't know what we're capable of, and therefore we certainly don't know what other people are capable of. Because how can I know what you're capable of if I don't even know what I'm capable of? So how do I decide? How do I even discover? Because it's a discovery process, what I'm capable of. I have to try. I have to play. I have to go out into the world and try things out and see if I like them, see if I'm good at them. I have to persist and see, like, oh, I tried this. Almost nothing you try first, you're going to be good at. And so then you have to decide, do I keep trying? And so your career is ultimately an emergent order, even as you're trying to plan it, because you don't know if you'll be good at the next step. You get a promotion and you're not sure if you're going to be capable of managing other people. And at first, maybe you're not. And then you learn. Or maybe it turns out you're bad at it and you actually need to take a step back and change gears, because you know what? You're better at the drafting table than trying to coordinate other people's priorities. That's your deal. So our lives are fundamentally an emergent order. And I think the tension we have without getting into like the conspirators and the crooks and the power mongers that want to tell other people what to do, and the busybodies that want to say no at every turn, except for themselves. Mm-hmm. We have to contend with the fact that here's this microphone that is clearly the product of a multiple layers of planning and design and precision. The cameras we're recording, they are not purely the product of an emergent order. There is planning. We are surrounded by planning. And yet, none of that planning would work if it wasn't embedded in the unplanned, competitive, evolutionary process of emergent order. None of it would work because the first versions of this didn't work. And if it did work, the implications of that are crazy. If you could centrally plan society, you would need to already know everything. Right now, in order for me to have any chance at planning your life, I need to already know its entire path and every interaction you're going to have with every other person all along the way. Because otherwise, how the hell am I going to do it? I can't possibly do it. Just like the first attempts to design this microphone definitely failed. Do you think they wanted it to fail? I mean, there's a creative process I believe I experience every time as a creative person. You have an idea and you think, this is awesome. And then you start to work on it and realize, this is hard. And then you hit the inevitable point where you say, this is trash. It always happens. You always go through a moment where your work is trash. You didn't want it to be trash. You didn't plan for it to be trash, but it's trash. And then you probably say, well, maybe I'm trash. Maybe I just suck. Maybe I just got over my skis. This is not good. But if it was ever going to be good, you have to push past that and keep at it, keep iterating and get this plug to actually stay connected, even when it gets bumped and doesn't rattle. And then you realize, oh, this is actually pretty good. And if you get all the way to the end, through every bit of emergent feedback, you come back to maybe, if you're lucky, oh, this is actually awesome. This is even better than I thought it was going to be. Or it's not, or it's different in a way it was unexpected. That's emergent order. This is the reality of the universe, and you deny it and try to change it at your peril. And that's the basically 100 million death count of the Soviets and Maoists of the 20th century. They were saying, like, no, we can plan society. We can tell you what you're going to be for the rest of your life. No, you can't. It's literally impossible. Communism isn't good in theory. It isn't good in theory. That claim, oh, well, communism's good in theory, but not in practice. No, it's broken at the most fundamental unit of knowledge itself, which is communism only works in heaven, where there is like an omniscient being that knows the entire path of all reality. Otherwise, can't work. And guess what? I bet there's no government in heaven. So,
I hope not.
It's like, why would you need it? We're in heaven. So, yeah.
How does that philosophy overlay, because I know it does, how you think about the work that you're doing with Dad Saves America? How does emergent order, this philosophical idea, this principle of reality, tie back to the way you think about who you have on the show and the conversations you have and what it can bring forth if you market it correctly and it gets in front of the right people and it grows and expands its reach? How does all of this fit together?
Well, it comes back to the prior part of the conversation, which is that the thing about human society, right, is that the basic unit is the individual. And we're not an isolated atomic unit. We are a social creature. We live in relationship with others. We can't even really understand ourselves except in that richer combination of our own mind and thoughts and soul and being and our relationships and the emergent waters we're in. We're like a boat in the ocean. But the order, I prefer the term emergent order to Friedrich Hayek, who was the big, the economist that really focused on this idea quite a bit. He referred to spontaneous order.
Why do you prefer emergent?
Because spontaneous, I think, strips out, like rhetorically, the fact that the individual human acts. So this is Mises, and Ludwig von Mises has this book, Human Action. And he's got a different methodology than Hayek, but he's arriving at very similar ideas. And basically he says, people make plans on the basis of their vision and their purpose for themselves. I say, I've got an idea for a video and it's going to be awesome. That is me harnessing my agency. That's me being capable of putting myself at risk of failure. That is me ideally doing the things that my parents helped me to know I can do. And so, given we live in a world that is fundamentally emergent, despite all the Fauci types thinking they can plan our lives for us, and can't, and it fails, and it's obviously a disaster. And even in COVID is the perfect example of just how you can't escape the nature of emergent reality. We had a moment where we got to just live in totalitarian society in America and around the world. It's like, you're telling me how many bags of frozen peas I can buy at the grocery store right now. Okay, this is it. This is what it's like to.
And what time you can go out to get them.
Right. And
what you have to wear while you're getting them.
And it only even operated at all for a brief moment because we were so wealthy as a society. You could kind of do that and it wouldn't be a total instant collapse, even though it destroyed millions and millions of people's lives. I'm not talking about the actual disease. I'm talking about the destruction laid by the policy of deciding let's be totalitarian for a year. And yet it obviously failed on every single front. Like the data's in, and the more emergent country, Sweden, which didn't do that and said, go about your lives, we're going to try to protect the old and the sick. They did better, period, full stop, end of story. America lost, Sweden won. Fauci lost. The high trust society of Sweden, which was actually more capitalist in this instance than our centrally planned society, they won. They did better. But to do better, you do have to fundamentally raise your kids and train yourself to be a functional moral agent in this world, to take responsibility for your choices, to own up to your failures, to persist through the challenges where you suck and it's the worst and you feel like you're the worst. You have to persist through those. That is our job. And that is how you thrive in a free society. That is how, as a father, I can set my son up to go out into a world that is in an emergent order and be one of the agents in that order, making it better, moving the society towards more order. And a better word for order is maybe harmony, function, progress. It's purpose. And that's our job. That's what we have to do. And when we don't do that, when that fails, the results are failure to thrive. The results are homelessness, addiction, incarceration, catastrophe. And we know this because it's plainly obvious and because it's in the data. You go to a prison and 9 out of 10 of the men in the prison didn't have a dad in their life. You go out into the streets and overwhelmingly you are on the street because of family breakdown. So that's disorder. That's chaos. And so that's how these things are deeply connected. The order that is the only reason order is possible is because individuals are making choices that move towards productive purpose. And I can't determine what the value of that productive purpose is. That's for you to decide. You want to be a stay-at-home mom. You want to be a titan of industry. You want to be a titan of industry for a while and then a stay-at-home mom, or vice versa. That's up to you. That's not up to me, because I don't know what you're capable of, just like you don't know what I'm capable of. But that's, to me, how all of this stuff fits together.
With all of that in mind, how do you think about, you've had some very interesting conversations on the show. What is your compass for, as a fellow podcaster, I'm always curious about this. What is your compass for who you want to talk to and types of conversations that you want to have? And like, what is the sort of, benchmark's the wrong word, but sort of the driving force that's helping you choose what you think the most important conversations are to have?
It's an interesting question. I don't know.
It's emergent.
I mean, we're a team here. And so there's a couple things. So one thing is, we just talked about this backdrop, which is the first filter. Mm-hmm. Can I talk to someone and share their ideas that will help the viewer and myself better understand how to navigate the world through that lens of individual like agency and autonomy and parenthood? Like, is this a conversation that would make someone's life better and arm them with ideas that matter and are tangible, even if they're super abstract at one level? We can, like, I talked to Peter Boghossian about his whole experience with the grievance sort of hoax that they pulled, which is amazing, sort of
publishing fake papers.
Yeah, publishing fake papers about these ridiculous gender studies and fake disciplines, mm-hmm. where you can, so that's useful, because if if your daughter or son comes home from college and says, I want to study gender studies, and you're like, that seems like a bad idea. I don't know if I want to even pay for that. Mm-hmm. Well, why? Is it just because you're like, you don't like lefty stuff? Or is it because it's all fake? Like, it's easily faked baloney. It's nonsense. So that conversation's useful, because we have to help our kids navigate their educational process. That's the first lens to me. Like, can I learn, and can I learn on behalf of the viewer? And sometimes it's a conversation with someone I already know pretty well, and I want to just help share their insights, but I'm always learning something. I also kind of approach it somewhat selfishly. Like, who do I want to talk to that's going to help me learn and understand the world? And hopefully if I like it, other people will. I will say there is this interesting tension, and I don't know how to think. I don't know what to do about this. Mm-hmm. And I had Bill de Blasio on the show recently.
I saw.
And I don't really agree with Bill de Blasio on just about anything philosophical or political. I mean, there are areas of agreement that are more personal and about like fatherhood and, and we're both humans. And we actually like got along kind of famously because, we sort of went off on roast pork sandwiches and being Italian, and that kind of set the stage. And that was like on purpose, because I want to be human. So I was interviewing him as part of another project. But I was like, this will be a great conversation to share. And of course we put it up, and the comments are like, this guy's terrible. He destroyed New York. He's a COVID villain. And it's like, I'm not even saying I disagree with those comments, but we live in a time that where trying to like understand each other, if we don't think you're on the same team values wise, has gotten monumentally harder, because the tools measure engagement. So how will someone see a new episode of our show? We can spend money to push it into their feed, which they may or may not like. But what you're hoping for is that it takes off and like goes viral. Well, when the Keynes Hayek rap videos came out, the way those things took off was because they were actually getting shared like crazy and put on like news websites and all kinds of stuff like that. And it was racking up. It was like embedded, the YouTube video being embedded on New York Times literally happened, or the front page of the CNN.com, which would never happen today. And now we live in this world where every platform wants to keep you there, will not refer you if you embed links to its competitor at all. Like if I post a picture of myself on the toilet on Facebook, I will get more likes and clicks or gross faces or emoji or whatever. But I will get more engagement in my Facebook feed posting a stupid picture of me hiding behind the, on the toilet than if I post a link to a YouTube video. Like no one will see it because they won't show it to anyone. And the same is true of YouTube. And I think YouTube's pretty meritocratic. It's trying to show you stuff you like. When I open up my thing, it's like, I like all this. Watch later, watch later, watch later, watch later. I can't even keep up with how many things. But if you post a video that is uncomfortable for your audience and they don't watch very much of it and they don't like it, it dies. And so just YouTube stops trying to show it to more people. So people don't even know you posted it. They don't even see the thumbnail. And I don't really know what to do about that. It's very counter to that educational process of engaging with ideas that are uncomfortable. And I think this is like the biggest struggle of our times. I think it's actually why it's even more important that inside of our safe spaces, if you will, of our family and friends, we have to push ourselves to be challenged with the ideas that we disagree with. Because otherwise we're never going to encounter them. I saw a recent video that it was like a TikTok that showed that on the same video, this person saw different comments presented than their boyfriend. So it wasn't even just that the video, whether you see it or not, is different. The comment sections are increasingly looking different depending on who you are. So you see a controversial video, and if you think this person sucks, you will see because of the other things you've watched, you will see the comments that are like, this guy's the worst. He's such a liar. He's a crook. And if you like that person, you watch the same video and you see the same comments feed. And it's like, oh, they're the best. Oh, forget all the haters. No. He's on the truth. Like we're on a path to hell. So this is, again, I think it's why it's so important that we as influencers in our families and friend circles, like, take it upon ourselves to be intellectual adults, and grapple with the stuff that's uncomfortable. Because if we don't, like, the emergent order of learning dies, and the trial and error of ideas dies, and literally the progress of civilization dies, and we are stuck right where we are, and we will struggle to hold on to what we've already got.
And I think it's easy to underestimate, and maybe I'm being a little chronically optimistic here, but I do think it's easy to underestimate how much being willing to have those conversations, like there's many caveats that come along with this, right? Like you have to be around people who are open to it and who are willing to have the conversations, but we're very, very socially influenced creatures, but we're not just socially influenced on like a broad societal level. We're socially influenced on a very micro scale in our very small communities. And so we are hardwired to mold and adapt to our surrounding culture because we want to fit into our community. To some extent, we need to in order for our community to function. It's hardwired in us on a very deep level. Yeah. And so I don't think it is a futile, like, there are many situations in which people don't want to have the conversations, but if you're around people who generally agree with you on a lot of things and are not hostile to you, then being willing to talk about both sides, being curious to talk about both sides, like, I don't think actually is a hopeless case. Oh, I think it's not only not hopeless, I think it is the only way any progress has ever occurred. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, talks about this very explicitly. He says, we are 10% bee and 90% chimp, meaning we're mostly an individual with our own agency, our own plans and purposes, leave me the hell alone. But we are 10% bee, like collective, social, communal,
the 90 versus 10 is not, it's a euphemistic. It's not like an accurate percentage or something. But there's a reason why solitary confinement is the worst form of torture in prison, right? Because we need to be connected to other people by and large, except for sociopaths and stuff. So we need that. And we want to be liked as a part. We want to be part of the group. We want to feel like we belong in the group. And then we've also got this other thing, right? Which is we evolved groupishly in tribes. And a lot of times if someone came in from over the hill and looked different, they were probably like scouting to raid our stuff. So our like tribal impulse is inescapable and it's part of the nature of our reality. And so our like tendency towards like, no, you're my enemy. Ooh, what did you say? Something anti-trans or pro-trans? Like, now you're my enemy. I don't want to hear anything else you say. Like we've got all this ever-growing number of like tribal paints, and we see one, we kind of assume the rest. We tend to actually be kind of right, roughly. So that just reinforces. And I think the fundamental insight, because the question is, well, how does anybody ever learn anything? And what happens is other ideas seep into our belonging group. And then within we generally agree, we're kind of on the same page. Ooh, there's this part we disagree about. Well, we can disagree agreeably because we know we're not enemies, we're friends. So we can like actually have like a raucous conversation about this thing that we disagree about and actually be friendly and like maybe learn or change our mind because one of us is wrong. So the right one has the chance to make a case and convince the wrong one that they're right. And so I don't think it's hopeless. I think it's the only path. And I think the thing we are still socially evolving to figure out is how to make sure those spaces are happening and that we're not getting lazy. And I think I'd like to believe that we're kind of forced into it by reality. And this is why I think work from home kind of sucks. Because a lot of times those conversations happen in the unplanned time. Work from home is sort of like public school. Oh, it's time for a meeting. So bloop, my alarm went off, and now I click into the Zoom meeting, and now we're going to be creative and collaborate for the next 45 minutes before I have to get ready for my next meeting. Sounds like class. But in reality, when you're in a group of people trying to coordinate and collaborate on a project, you're walking to the bathroom and you run into your coworker and you're like, oh, you're having an offhanded conversation. And then an idea pops in that's suddenly like the key to unlock that thing you weren't sure what to do about. That is how it all works. And so I think we really have to try to create as much unplanned, emergent, open spaces where we can kind of peacefully like encounter friction, because there's no heat or light without friction.
Okay. We've covered a lot here. If people enjoyed this, where would you send them next?
Well, you can find Dad Saves America on YouTube. So youtube.com/dadsavesamerica. If you want to learn more about the organization, you can visit eo.foundation, and that'll give you like a background on who's this creepy cohort of weirdos making all this stuff. And we've also sort of soft launched our Substack, which is the place that if you love Dad Saves America, you're like, oh, I love that guy. What else he's got going? Go to Dad Saves America on Substack. That way, when you subscribe, we'll have your email address and we can reach you when the algorithm otherwise won't let us.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time for this. Thank you for hosting me in your beautiful studio. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, my friends, that is a wrap for today. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you found this valuable. Please leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. Please like the video on YouTube. And please don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you listen to make sure that you don't miss next week's episode. Thank you so much, friends. I will see you next week.